Suffering in an avoidant does not look like suffering. That is the central and most important thing to understand before anything else. The architecture that was built to manage vulnerability was also built to manage the visibility of pain, to present a composed and functional exterior while something significantly different is happening in the interior. This means the suffering tends to be hidden, not just from the people around the avoidant, but to a meaningful degree from the avoidant themselves. The same management strategies that prevent the expression of pain also prevent its full acknowledgement internally. The avoidant who is deeply suffering may not have clear access to that suffering as suffering, may experience it as restlessness, as flatness, as a vague and persistent wrongness that does not resolve, but also does not fully reveal itself as what it is. I want to describe 5 signs honestly, without the inflation that makes every avoidant behavior into evidence of profound and consuming pain, and without the deflation that makes genuine suffering invisible because it does not look the way suffering is supposed to look. The first hidden sign is a change in the quality of their productivity. The avoidant under genuine interior stress tends to become either significantly more productive or significantly less so. The more productive version is the familiar response of someone whose management strategy includes the density of activity as a way of keeping the interior occupied. The busyness that functions as a form of not stopping, of not allowing the quiet in which what is actually present would become audible. But the less productive version is the more revealing one. The specific flatness that arrives when the suffering has accumulated past the point where activity adequately manages it. When the doing that usually keeps the interior at a manageable level stops working as effectively. When the person who is normally functional and capable and engaged with their work finds the engagement requiring more than it returns. This flatness is not visible as depression in the clinical sense necessarily, is more subtle than that. A slight reduction in the quality of presence, a slightly diminished capacity for the focused engagement that was previously characteristic. The specific tiredness of someone whose interior is consuming resources that would otherwise be available for ordinary functioning. People close to the avoidant notice it before the avoidant acknowledges it. Notice the slight dimming, the marginally reduced quality of engagement, the specific and not quite nameable quality of someone who is running on slightly less than their usual capacity. That reduction is the suffering making its presence known in the only domain where the management strategies have limited reach, the functional output. The second hidden sign is a specific change in their relationship with solitude. The avoidant typically has a genuine and not uncomfortable relationship with being alone. The solitude that others might experience as loneliness is often experienced by the avoidant as regulation, as the specific and valued experience of the interior space that the architecture requires. When the avoidant is deeply suffering, this relationship with solitude changes. The solitude that was comfortable becomes charged. The interior space that was regulatory becomes the space where what cannot be managed elsewhere is most present, where the suffering that the activity and the busyness and the social management were keeping at bay finds its way to the surface. The avoidant begins to manage the solitude differently, to fill it in ways that are uncharacteristic, to seek out company or noise or engagement that they would previously have been comfortable without, or to find the solitude increasingly difficult to inhabit without a quality of agitation that was not previously there. This change is significant because the relationship with solitude is so characteristic of the avoidant's ordinary functioning. When it shifts, when the solitude that was reliable regulation becomes something to be managed rather than something that provides management, the shift is evidence of something in the interior that the ordinary strategies are no longer adequately containing. The third hidden sign is subtle and requires attention to notice, but it is one of the more honest signals available. Their humor changes, not disappears, changes. The specific quality of what they find funny, what they reach for when lightness is needed, what their humor is doing in the conversation, shifts in ways that are small but detectable to people who know them well. The avoidant's humor in ordinary circumstances tends to be intelligent and often slightly self-contained. Wit that maintains a certain quality of distance, that finds things funny without the humor becoming a vehicle for genuine emotional disclosure. Under genuine suffering, the humor either dries somewhat, loses the ease that characterized it before, or moves in the other direction, becomes slightly darker, slightly more likely to contain the kind of self-deprecation that is not quite self-deprecation. That is the suffering looking for a way to be expressed that is still deniable as expression. The joke that contains something real. The offhand comment that, if taken seriously rather than as humor, would be an honest statement about what the interior is carrying. The specific and slightly different quality of lightness that arrives when the lightness is working harder than usual to cover something that is not entirely light. People who know the avoidant well feel this change more than they see it. The humor is still present, still functional. Something in the quality of it is different. Something is slightly more effortful, slightly less spontaneous, as if the humor is doing a job it was not previously required to do. The fourth hidden sign is one that people in the avoidant's life tend to notice in retrospect rather than in real time, because it is subtle enough while it is happening to be explained away by any number of more comfortable interpretations. The avoidant becomes slightly more present in conversations that touch on loss, not dramatically, not in a way that announces itself as significant, but in the specific quality of attention that arrives when a conversation moves toward the subject of losing something important, toward grief, toward the experience of having had something real and not being able to keep it. The avoidant, who is deeply suffering, who is carrying the specific and unacknowledged weight of their own loss or grief, or the sustained cost of patterns that keep producing the same outcome, tends to find these conversations arresting in a way that other conversations are not. The attention sharpens slightly. The quality of listening changes. The specific and usually well-maintained distance that the avoidant brings to emotionally charged subjects develops a small gap in it. Something in the conversation is landing in a way that is not purely intellectual engagement with an interesting topic. It is recognition. The avoidant listening to someone else's experience of loss is briefly, quietly, recognizing something in their own, not saying so. The architecture prevents the saying, but the recognition is present in the quality of the attention, in the slight pause before a response, in the particular care with which they engage with a subject that their usual management strategies would process at more comfortable distance. The suffering is listening to itself described in the experience of someone else, and the listening has a quality that ordinary intellectual engagement does not produce. The fifth hidden sign is the most difficult to describe without making it sound more dramatic than it actually appears. They begin to ask questions differently. Not different questions necessarily, a different quality in the asking, a slight increase in the genuine curiosity that underlies the questions, a marginal reduction in the management of the asking towards safe and non-revealing territory. Questions about meaning, about whether the choices people make are the choices they would make again, about what people regret and what they would do differently, about how people navigate the specific and uncomfortable territory of knowing something about themselves that they are not sure how to act on. These questions tend to appear in the avoidant who is suffering because the suffering is pressing towards something that the ordinary management strategies are not resolving, toward the honest engagement with what the cost of the pattern actually is, with whether the self-sufficiency is serving the life they actually want to be living. The questions are the avoidant thinking out loud in the only way the architecture currently permits, through the displacement of the inquiry onto other people's experience, through the asking of what are really their own questions at one remove, through the genuine curiosity about how other people navigate the territory the avoidant themselves is currently standing in, without being able to name the standing. People close to the avoidant sometimes feel, in these conversations, that something is being asked of them beyond the surface question, that there is a weight to the inquiry that the casualness of its delivery does not account for, that the avoidant is present in the asking in a way they are not always present. That feeling is accurate. These 5 signs together produce a specific and recognizable portrait of someone whose interior is under pressure that the exterior is working hard to contain. The changed productivity, the altered relationship with solitude, the shifted humor, the arrested attention at others' descriptions of loss, the questions with weight beneath them. None of these is the suffering announcing itself directly. All of them are the suffering finding the gaps in the management, the places where the architecture's coverage is least complete, where what is actually present finds its way through. The cumulative picture is of someone who is carrying more than their exterior suggests, who is in genuine interior difficulty that is real and significant and not being adequately expressed or processed. And here is what I want to say honestly about this picture. It generates compassion naturally. The recognition of hidden suffering in someone you care about, or cared about, or are trying to understand, produces the specific pull of someone whose particular gifts include the capacity for genuine compassion toward others' pain. That compassion is real, is worth honoring as the genuine expression of who you are. And the compassion does not obligate you to anything, does not require you to become the person who addresses their suffering, does not mean your own life should pause or redirect to accommodate the hidden pain you have now accurately identified, does not convert your perception of their suffering into a responsibility for its resolution. Their suffering is theirs to carry and to address, and to eventually bring to the honest light of genuine engagement with themselves, with a therapist, with the specific and demanding work of looking honestly at what the patterns cost and what a different approach might require. That work is theirs. Your life is yours, and the compassion you feel, however genuine, is most usefully directed toward yourself right now, toward the honest recognition of what you have been carrying, what the dynamic cost you, what your own interior is reporting about what it needs. The 5 signs of the avoidant's hidden suffering are real. Your own hidden costs are equally real, and they deserve at least as much honest attention as theirs, probably more, because they are yours, and you are the person this conversation is actually for. The 5 signs are real, and what they point toward, taken together, is something worth naming honestly before adding more to what the previous parts described. The avoidant who is deeply suffering is a person in genuine pain that their architecture prevents them from adequately addressing. That is a real and difficult thing. The compassion it generates is appropriate. The recognition of genuine interior struggle behind the composed exterior is accurate and useful. And the honest thing to add is this: hidden suffering, however genuine, does not automatically become the work of addressing it. The suffering being present does not mean the avoidant is moving toward the honest engagement that would actually address it, does not mean the signs are the beginning of genuine change, rather than the ongoing expression of a pattern that produces suffering without yet producing the examination of what generates it. The signs can persist for a very long time without resolving into anything different. The hidden suffering can remain hidden indefinitely, can be carried, managed, expressed through these indirect channels, without ever becoming the direct and deliberate engagement with what the pattern costs that genuine change requires. That is the honest limitation of what the 5 signs actually tell you. They tell you the suffering is real. They do not tell you it is moving toward anything. And that distinction matters for how you hold what you have accurately identified. Because the accurate identification of someone's hidden suffering can, in the specific psychology of someone whose gifts include deep compassion and the capacity for genuine understanding of others' pain, become another form of the same orientation that has been consuming your attention, the recognition of their suffering becoming the reason to remain oriented toward their interior, the compassion the recognition generates becoming the justification for continuing to direct your most significant attention towards someone else's experience rather than toward your own. That is worth examining honestly, not because compassion is wrong, because compassion without boundaries, compassion that consistently prioritizes the suffering of others over honest attention to your own, is the pattern that produced the dynamic in the first place. Your own suffering is worth naming too, not in comparison to theirs, not as a competition over whose pain is more significant or more deserving of acknowledgement, as the simple and honest recognition that what the dynamic cost you was real and significant and has its own expression that deserves genuine attention. The suffering you carried in the dynamic was not always hidden in the same way, was more often expressed, more often brought to the surface, more often made visible through the reaching and the hoping, and the various forms of genuine engagement with what the connection was and was not providing. But some of it was hidden too, the specific and quiet diminishment of what you stopped asking for because asking led to withdrawal, the gradual and mostly invisible reduction of the version of yourself that knew clearly what you deserved, the particular and unacknowledged grief of loving someone genuinely and consistently receiving something insufficient in return. That suffering is yours, real, deserving of the same honest and patient attention that you have been extending so generously toward the 5 signs of theirs. The healing that is actually available to you is not primarily about understanding the avoidant's hidden suffering more accurately. However useful that understanding is, however genuinely it removes the misattribution of their behavior to your inadequacy, it is not the substance of the healing itself. The substance of the healing is in the honest engagement with your own interior, with what you actually feel, beneath the understanding and the compassion and the sophisticated psychological framework, with what the experience cost you in terms that are specific and personal, and not filtered through the lens of why the avoidant behaved as they did. What did it feel like to love someone whose suffering was hidden from you in ways that made the loving consistently more costly than it returned? What did it feel like to extend genuine care towards someone whose architecture prevented the full reception of that care? What did it feel like to be in a connection where your worth was being received through a reduction filter that made the full weight of what you brought consistently invisible? Those feelings are the territory, the honest, specific, personal territory of your own experience, and they deserve the quality of attention you have been directing toward the 5 signs. Your healing begins there, not in the accurate understanding of their hidden suffering, in the honest engagement with your own. The honest engagement with your own suffering is not a single moment, it is a practice. The repeated and somewhat unglamorous return to what is actually present in your own interior, rather than to the more familiar and more consuming territory of someone else's. What is actually present in your own interior right now, not in relation to the avoidant, not filtered through the understanding of why they are the way they are. Just the plain and honest report of what your own experience has been, and what it has cost, and what it is asking for now. That report is worth sitting with, without immediately converting it into something more manageable, without the analysis that turns the plain feeling into an interesting psychological observation, without the compassion for the avoidant's hidden suffering that redirects the attention outward before the inward attention has had time to do its work. Just the honest feeling, in the body, in the specific and located way that genuine feeling lives in the body when it is not being managed into something more acceptable. That is where the healing actually lives, not in the 5 signs, not in the accurate reading of someone else's hidden suffering, in the honest, unglamorous, patient engagement with your own, which is still here, still waiting, still worth the full attention you have been so generously giving elsewhere. The healing from hidden suffering, yours and anyone else's, is not primarily about understanding. That bears repeating because this entire conversation, and many of the conversations that preceded it, has been organized around understanding as the primary tool. Understanding is real and it matters. The accurate account of why people behave as they do, the honest psychology of what the architecture produces and what it costs, all of that has genuine value. It removes the misattribution of other people's limitations to your own inadequacy. It gives language to experiences that were previously just confusing and painful. It provides the specific relief of knowing that what you sensed was real and that the confusion was produced by something real rather than by your own misreading. That relief is worth having, and understanding alone does not heal the specific and personal cost of having been inside the dynamic, does not restore what the reciprocity deficit depleted, does not return the full weight of the self-trust that the repeated experience of having your worth received through a reduction filter gradually compromised. The healing of those things requires something different from understanding, something more direct, more embodied, more specifically yours. It requires the honest acknowledgement of what the experience actually felt like, not what it meant psychologically, not why it happened, what it felt like, in the body, in the ordinary moments of the dynamic where the cost was being paid without being named. The specific feeling of reaching towards someone and not quite being met, the particular quality of a closeness that kept stopping just short of what genuine closeness actually feels like, the quiet and accumulating experience of being in a connection where the full weight of what you brought was consistently not landing with the weight it deserved. Those feelings are real and specific and yours, and they have been waiting with considerable patience for honest acknowledgement that is not immediately followed by the understanding of why the avoidant could not do better. The understanding is true, and it is not the same as the acknowledgement. The acknowledgement says, this hurt, this cost something real. I deserved more than this and I did not receive it, and that is a genuine loss that belongs to my experience, regardless of how understandable the reasons for it were. That acknowledgement is not bitterness, is not the refusal of compassion for the avoidant's genuine limitations. It is the honest completion of the accounting, the part that does not get skipped in service of the more sophisticated and more comfortable position of someone who understands everything and therefore does not need to simply feel what the experience cost. You are allowed to simply feel what the experience cost, without the framework, without the softening, just the honest weight of it. The restoration of self-trust follows from that honest acknowledgement more reliably than from any amount of understanding, because the self-trust that was compromised was not primarily trust in your psychological analysis. It was trust in your own direct experience, in what you felt and what you sensed and what your own body reported about the quality of what was being offered and received. The restoration of that trust requires returning to direct experience as the primary source of information about your own life, not through the filter of someone else's psychology, not mediated by the sophisticated framework that explains why the experience felt the way it felt, just the direct experience itself, trusted, honored, given the full weight it deserves as the honest report of someone who was present in their own life and felt what they felt and deserves to have that feeling treated as real and important and worth attending to. That is the healing, simple, unglamorous, not organized around anyone else's interior, organized around yours, which was always the more important territory and which is still here, still yours. Still worth the full and honest attention you have been so generously directing elsewhere. Come home to it. That is the whole instruction.